It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this evening's event with Isabel Allende, featuring her new book, Ripper.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You know, it's great to get an applause even before I have done anything. I mean, this is a really free applause. Thank you so much. It's lovely also to be in a church. I feel powerful. It's great. Well, this book, Ripper, El Juego de Ripper en español, is quite a departure from my other books. And I hope you will like it as much as I liked writing it. It was great. I had a lot of fun. I couldn't take it seriously. And that's the way one should write, playing. The book is about a bunch of kids, 5 kids, that play online a role-playing game. And my attitude when I was writing the book was the same. I'm just playing that I'm writing a book. For the first time, I didn't feel the pressure to write the great American novel. Forget it. So I had fun. And it all started, it wasn't my idea, actually, because this is a thriller. And it's not a genre that I read. And I had never written anything like this. But in 2011, I told my agent, Carmen Balcells, that I was ready to retire. I'm just too old. I look good, but it takes a lot of money. So my agent panicked because I think I alone support the agency. Nobody is selling books nowadays. And she said, no, you have to write a book with your husband. My husband writes mysteries. And so we thought, well, that could be a good idea. Our marriage is not going very well, so we will have something in common. Maybe we can write a book. And we started talking about it. This was around October. And so we talked, but very loosely. I start all my books on January 8th. On January 7th, we didn't have anything, really. On January 8th, I got up very early, I did my meditation, and I had my candles, I had everything ready. 8 o'clock, I was sitting in my casita ready to write. He was watching TV, making eggs for breakfast, walking the dogs. So I realized that I was going to do all the work and he was going to get half the credit. Not very convenient. Also, he writes in English, and he has a span attention of 11 minutes for everything, including that, everything. So I can be writing 11 hours, not the other, but writing. And I write in Spanish, so it was impossible. We ended up fighting like dogs, and finally he went to his room to write his 6th novel, and I went to my room to start my first adventure in this genre. So the first day, I had been writing all day. Willie calls me for dinner. He's the cook. Not a good cook, but at least he cooks. Otherwise, we would starve. And so he called me to have a glass of wine and dinner. He said, how did your day go? And I said, fine. You know, I'm setting the atmosphere of San Francisco, North Gate, the Italian neighborhood. He said, what? In a mystery, he said, you need a corpse in the first page. That was new for me, so I realized I had to read a few mysteries before writing. And I read the Scandinavian that were so popular in 2012. All the Stieg Larsson, the Millennium and all that. And I watched a few movies, and then I thought I was well prepared. Then the next day, again, I couldn't get a corpse in the first page. I tried, but I couldn't. But I think that we all have the fantasy of killing people, so it was sort of in my mind. I would dream about it, mostly killing Willie, actually. And then I was so fortunate that there was a mystery writers conference at Book Passage, a bookstore near my house. And I attended the conference, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot, of course, from the faculty. There were detectives, policemen, forensic doctors, people who deal with crime, and the students would ask questions. And from the questions of the students, I got most of my book. The students were mostly middle-aged women, a little bit overweight, with Birkenstock. Lovely, lovely women who should be making cookies for their grandchildren, and they only talk about crime, nothing else. And they are experts. And for example, one of the questions, if I inject a blood thinner to the victim, and I stab her 13 times and hang her upside down in the shower, would the blood congeal in the bathtub? Now, who could come up with something like that? Never in my dreams would I, so I just copied the questions, and from that, I got the book. But following my husband's advice that you have to start with a corpse in the first page, this is the first, this is how the book starts, the first paragraph. I hope I can read it, because these glasses, we bought them in CVS and they're not that good. Whew, really fuzzy. Mom is still alive, but she's going to be murdered at midnight on Good Friday, Amanda Martin told the deputy chief, who didn't even think to question the girl. She'd already proven she knew more than he and all his colleagues in homicide put together. The woman in question was being held at an unknown location somewhere in the 7,000 square miles of the San Francisco Bay Area. If they were to find her alive, they had only a few hours, and the deputy chief had no idea where or how to begin. Willie liked that introduction. He said, okay, that's not a corpse exactly, but almost. And when I finished the book, he reads slowly in Spanish. He speaks it perfectly well, like a Mexican bandido, but he does speak it. But it takes him a long time to read. So he started reading the book, and with a red pencil, ready to correct. And then after the third page, he said, you know what? This is just another one of your books. There's nothing I can do to improve it. Just leave it as is. And so it went to Spain, and it was published in Spain. And it was published simultaneously in several languages. And it's doing really well in Spanish and Italian and other languages. So I'm hoping that you will like it in English. Okay, I will read for like 7 or 8 minutes, and then we can ask questions. That's the most interesting part. And after that, I suppose they told you I'm ready to sign everything you have. Old books, new books, books by other authors, checkbooks, anything. But only the signature. I will repeat this in Spanish because Latinos do not listen. Voy a firmar todo lo que tengan, todos los libros viejos, libros nuevos, todo. Pero solo la firma, sin dedicatoria porque es mucha gente, ¿ok? They refers to the first murder as the case of the misplaced baseball bat, so as not to insult the victim by giving it a more explicit name. They were 5 teenagers and an elderly man who met up online to play a role-playing game called Ripper. The game master was a girl called Amanda Martin. The kids who played Ripper were a select group of freaks and geeks from around the world who had first met up online to hunt down the mysterious Jack the Ripper. As games master, Amanda was responsible for plotting these adventures, carefully bearing in mind the strengths and weaknesses of the alter egos created by the players. At 17, Amanda was idiosyncratic of appearance, shy of character, and magnificent of mind. She was dreadfully spoiled and vegetarian, only because she didn't have to cook for herself. When she was forced to do so, she would be less fussy about her diet. Her addiction to horrid Scandinavian crime novels developed naturally into a morbid interest in evil in general and premeditated murder in particular. On the morning of October 13, the fourth grade students of Golden Hills School raced into the gym to whistle blasts from their coach in the doorway. Normally, they would run 2 laps around the basketball court to warm up, but this morning they came to a shuddering halt, shocked by the grisly sight of a man sprawled across a vaulting horse, his pants pulled around his ankles, his buttocks bared, and the handle of a baseball bat inserted into his rectum. Now, I came up with this idea. Everybody thinks it's Willie's idea. It was mine. Knowing Willie, you would expect this. The stunned children stood motionless around the corpse until one 9-year-old boy bent down and ran his finger through the dark stain on the floor and realized that it was not chocolate, but congealed blood. A second boy picked up a spent bullet cartridge and slipped it into his pocket, intending to swap it during recess for a porn magazine, while a girl filmed the scene on her cell phone. Just then, the coach bounded over to the group of students, whistle trilling with every breath, and seeing this strange spectacle, suffered a panic attack. The fourth graders raised the alarm, and other teachers quickly appeared and dragged the children and the hysterical coach from the gym. The teachers removed the baseball bat, and as they laid the corpse out on the floor, they noticed a bullet hole in the center of the victim's forehead. They covered the body with a pair of sweatpants, closed the door, and waited for the police, who arrived precisely 19 minutes later, by which time the crime scene had been so completely contaminated it was impossible to tell what the hell had happened. A little later, during the first press conference, Deputy Chief Bob Martin, who, by the way, was Amanda's father, announced that the victim had been identified as one Ed Staton, 49 years old, a school security guard. "Tell us about the baseball bat," a tabloid journalist yelled. Furious to discover that information about the case had been leaked, which was not only humiliating to Ed Staton, but possibly damaging to the reputation of the school, the deputy chief snapped that such details would be documented during the autopsy. "What about the suspects? This security guard, was he gay?" Bob Martin ignored the barrage of questions and brought the press conference to a close. A group of 12th graders had been in the gym the night before rehearsing a Halloween musical involving zombies and rock and roll, but they had not found out about the murder until the following day. By midnight, some hours before the crime was committed, according to the police, there had been no one in the school building. The teenagers in the parking lot who had been loading their instruments into a van had been the last people to see Ed Staton alive. In their statement, they said that the guard had waved to them before driving off in a small car at about 12:30. The police quickly worked out that it had not been the victim's car, since Staton's silver gray SUV was parked a few yards from the band's van. It was suggested that Staton had driven off with someone who had been waiting for him and came back to the school later to pick up his car. At a second press conference, the deputy chief of the Personal Crimes Division, Bob Martin, explained that the guard was not due to finish his shift until 6 a.m., and they had no information about why he had left the school that night, returning later only to find death lying in wait. Bob Martin's daughter, Amanda, who was watching the press conference on TV, phoned her father to correct him. It was not death that had been lying in wait for Ed Staton, but an assassin. I won't read anymore because I want you to buy the book. I'm ready for questions. Yes. You can either yell the question and I'll repeat it, or walk to the microphone.
I can't yell. My name is Valbona. I was born and raised in Albania. I read your first book, House of Spirits, when I was 14.
In which language did you read?
In Albanian.
In Albanian?
Yes.
Ha! Did I tell you?
And not only that, but shortly after reading the book, I kissed my first boy, much older boy.
Your teacher, probably.
No.
No.
Oh, not that risque. It was my neighbor. But, and as I'm reading that book, which I wasn't supposed to read, I had it covered with a newspaper that was produced by the Communist Party of Albania. And that book was not supposed to be published, but it was underground, published during that time. My mother found it. She opened the book somewhere and found a particular piece that was not appropriate for me. So she grounded me for 2 days and told me that I couldn't read for 2 days, and that was terrible. Like, that was the worst punishment. At the end of 2 days, I go to find the book to continue reading, only to discover that my mother was reading it at that point. So I'm reminding her of this story, and it is lovely to meet you.
Thank you.
And to read the books that you have produced over the years. So the question I have for you is about your creative process. How do you make that switch from producing historical novels, then something personal about your life, to something like this? As a writer, how do you make that choice, and how does this compare to other things that you've written in the past?
Well, thank you for reading my book in Albanian. I hope the translation was good. Sometimes I think that they translate another book and just put my name there. My books are also pirated in in a few languages. And in the pirated editions, no one checks the translation, so you don't know what they are translating. But in any case, I'm very proud to see that someone was reading my book, my censored book. The House of the Spirits was also censored in Chile when it came out, because we had a dictatorship in Chile at the time, and people would smuggle the book into the country without the jacket. And I have seen copies of the book that have been read by like more than 100 people, just one copy. So it's very flattering. The creative process, who knows? I mean, I write, I don't plan the book ahead. Often I have a vague idea of the time and the place that the story will happen, but I don't know anything else. When I came to the United States in 1987, I realized that San Francisco is a very new city. At the time, it wasn't even 150 years old. And this sophisticated city had been founded by greedy men, young men that came for the gold rush, polygamous preachers, women of easy virtue. And from that kind of people, this town emerged. It's like Sydney, founded by ex-cons, so it's great. And I wanted to write about the gold rush because it's a time in history when everything is upside down, there's just chaos. And it's a time of testosterone, just men, you know, at the beginning. Very interesting. So I wanted to write about that, but I didn't know why I was so interested. I just had an idea of the time and the event of the gold rush, and that was it. I had researched a little. I didn't have my characters, I didn't have the story. And it's the same with all my books. I don't, except for Zorro, I don't know what the book will be about until I'm way into it. And then suddenly, things start to happen. The characters become people, the story unfolds itself, and I'm surprised in each turn, and then I know that the book is going somewhere. If I have a plan, I can't follow it. Why one story and not another one? I don't know. I feel that I have like seeds, probably in my ovaries or someplace there. It's not in the brain, anyhow. And these seeds sometimes start to grow, and they become uncomfortable. I think about it all the time. And then I'm ready to write that story. I don't know what the story will be about until way into the writing. Yes? No, you just yell the question, I'll repeat it.
Hola, Isabel.
Hola.
Thank you very much for coming. And I guess, how did you were brave enough to become a writer? Because I know that House of Spirits came out as a letter to your grandmother.
Yeah.
Right? But how did you, found the courage to change your life and become this new person?
How did I change? How did I become a writer?
More than becoming a writer, but find the courage to be the thing, to be the person that you wanted to be.
Look, when I was almost 40 years old, my life wasn't going anywhere. I was living in Venezuela. My marriage wasn't going anywhere either, my first marriage. My kids were ready to go to university. I felt that I had wasted my life. I was not even living in my own country. And then I started this letter for my grandfather who was dying in Chile, and I could not go back to Chile to bid him farewell. I didn't know what I was doing. I just started writing, telling stories one after the other, no plan. At the end of the year, I had a job, a day job, of course. I worked 12 hours a day administering a school, 2 shifts. So I could only write at night in a little portable typewriter. You have no idea what that is. You are used to the computer. Imagine that you need to move a paragraph. You had to cut it with scissors. And with tape, you would put it there. And then you had to correct with Typex, a sort of white paint, and then find the word that would fit exactly in the space. You couldn't find a word that was longer, and if it was too short, it wouldn't fit either. So that's how we worked, and with carbon paper. So I finished this horribly dirty manuscript, and it was just a lucky story that it got published in Europe. It became a lucky book. And because I was living so far away, I didn't receive the echoes of what was going on until a year later, which was good, because by then I was writing at night also my second book. And then I started my third book before I decided I could leave my day job and just write. So it doesn't happen easily, and it doesn't happen to everybody. Yesterday, I was at a wonderful event with Elizabeth Gilbert, and somebody asked about what would she recommend to an aspiring writer. And she said something that I thought was beautiful. She said, in any art, not only writing, but any form of art, do not expect the art to support you. Do not expect anything from the art. You do it because if you don't, the burden of this thing that you have inside that you have not expressed will kill you. So you do it for the love of it, for the process, not for publication, not for fame, and certainly not for money. Don't clap, because this was Elizabeth Gilbert who said it, not me. Yes. Actually, wait. Nobody in this side? Okay, then you.
Hi.
Hi.
I just finished to read Amor.
Yeah.
And how is the best definition that you can have for amor, for love, after all your experience? And
Yeah, she's talking about a book that was published in Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, but not in English, called Amor, Love. And it is the love scenes of my books put together. Again, it wasn't my idea. My German publisher had the idea of using, because often people talk about the erotic scenes in my books, which are not really erotic, because they are very mild, very bland. But he put it together, and I don't speak a word of German, so I had no idea what he had done. But I thought, this is not a bad idea, and I started selecting some of them, and I wrote a prologue, and I sort of linked them all together in some way. And that's what the book became, with beautiful illustrations from a very good illustrator in Spain. Now, how would I define the book? The book is just nothing. It's a patchwork of stuff. Don't even worry about it. It's just lovely to look at it because of the illustrations. but it won't arouse anybody. Anybody. I mean, you can see much better stuff on TV today. So if you're looking for porn, it's not, unfortunately. I always wanted to write an erotic book, but my mother is alive. And she's 93, the old lady, and she's immortal. I will have to kill her somehow. By the time she dies, I'll be too old to write anything, let alone an erotic novel. Now, how do I define love? I don't know, there are so many kinds of love, but I think it's the energy that moves the world. It moves the nature, everything. Everything is about connection and about love. So that's what I write about all the time. It's about relationships, about people. Yes?
Hi, my name is Maria. I'm from Mexico. And I wanted to ask you, would you think feminism has an impact on your writing? And if so, in what way?
Feminism.
What did you say?
Feminism.
Huh?
Feminism.
Feminism? Feminismo en mis libros?
Un impacto en su manera de escribir.
Yeah. Well, I think that she's talking about feminism in my books. I think that the author is always between the lines. For me, it would be almost impossible to write a book, for example, about Wall Street, because it has nothing to do with my life, my experience, or it doesn't interest me at all. But the person I am, and my own experience, the things I care for, they appear in the characters, in the plot, in between the lines, the things the characters say. Why do they say these things and not other things? It's because it's me talking. And I have been a feminist since before the word was invented. I was, I don't know, 5 probably in Chile, in the 40s. And I didn't want to be like my mother. I adore my mother. But we were living in my grandfather's house. My father had abandoned my mother with 3 babies. And my mother didn't have any money. She only had the charity of her father and her brothers. The males had income, cars, freedom, jobs. My mother, I always saw her as a victim of patriarchy, of authority, of the society in which we lived, and of the church. Sorry about the church. I didn't want to be like that. I wanted to be like the males in the family. So feminism for me started like this anger, this thing that was boiling inside. And it was much later, in my 20s, when I started reading feminist books by British or European feminists, that I realized that I wasn't alone, that there was an articulate language to express all these ideas, and there was a movement out there that I could join. And since then, my life has been guided by feminist principles, which doesn't mean that I don't like men. You know, today, young women don't want to say that they are feminists, although they enjoy all the rights that their mothers and grandmothers obtained for them, because it's not sexy. And they don't think that 80% of the women in the world are still exploited, they suffer violence, they have a position in the culture and in the world that is submissive. So we still have to fight for our sisters. So that is my life, and that's how I write. So you will find always women in my books who have probably been abused or exploited, and against all odds, they survive. I see them all the time in the world. I have a foundation, and that's what we do in the foundation. The mission is empowerment of women and girls. That's what I want to do, because I think the world will change when we empower women and girls. Yes, over there.
Do you think the number you live here in the States has influenced the way your novels have?
That living in the United States influences the way I write?
And the style
The style. Well, many things influence the style. To begin with, the passage of time. When I wrote The House of the Spirits, it was the time of long Baroque books in the style of magic realism of Latin America. That's gone, passé, for more than 30 years. Literature has changed a lot. It's more agile, often it's less political, and it's not only in Chile, everywhere it has changed. It's visual, much more visual. Living in the United States also has influenced me because I live in English, but I write in Spanish. My sentences are shorter. If I can find a good noun to replace 3 adjectives, I will use it. My husband, who is a lawyer, and 99% of his clientele were Latinos, most of them illegal, said that, would say that he could recognize if a letter was in Spanish or in English before opening the envelope, because the Spanish letter was heavier. Truly, in Spanish you need 2 pages to say what in English you say in 1 paragraph, because in English you go straight to the point. In Spanish, you go around, around, and around, and then finally you sort of suggest it at the end. Never get to the point. It's impolite. In Spanish, it's impolite to go immediately and say what you have to say. No, there's first manners and you know, a certain formality. So it has influenced, absolutely, my way of writing. But not the themes that I'm interested in, not the kind of books that I write. Why do I see hands? Oh, one hand over there. And later you, yeah.
Slightly more conventional question. You've written in biographies, you've written autobiographies, you've written historic novels, modern day novels, and now you're just doing thriller. What's your next genre that you want to explore?
That I'll repeat for the people up there, that I have written autobiographies and historical novels and all kinds of genres, that what am I going to explore next? First, I have to say that I have never written an autobiography. I have written memoirs. The difference is that autobiography is about your life, your true life. It's facts. I don't remember the facts. I make up everything. Don't believe anything I write. The people that appear in my memoirs are disgusted with me because they don't recognize themselves. And I have no idea. You know, I often ask, have I been here before? Have I been in Venice? I have no idea. So I'm always lost in the world, so I would never be able to write an autobiography. And what would be the next book? I don't know. I started something on January 8th, but then I had to do this book tour. And I don't know, when I go back, what will happen? The characters are not speaking to me yet. There's something in the air, but I don't know what it is. In any case, it's not another thriller. I killed so many people in this book that I have to fill my reservoirs before I can write another thriller. Yes, no, excuse me, there was someone that, yeah.
I remember you had an interview with...
you have to raise your...
I remember you had an interview with Chris Lydon a while back, and you were talking about the book about your daughter, Paula. And I always remember that, and I took the tape to it and kept that. I had spent years in Chile also, so any Chilean that pops up, I'm interested in. But yours was very, very human, that interview.
He's remembering an interview that I did years ago, and he has been in Chile also. Well, did you like Chile?
Yes.
Oh, good. I mean, less than here. Yeah, less problems than here, actually, at this point. Yeah. Okay, over here, yes? You didn't ask before, no?
I have.
No.
Oh, you did? No.
Ah, yeah, okay, yeah.
I'm Brazilian,
Yeah?
And I was introduced to your literature by my grandfather when I was 15. He gave me one of your books, and since then he gave me one book each year. Unfortunately, he passed away, which means that I got orphaned, and I started buying your own books by myself because I couldn't live without your stories anymore. I got addicted, and so please don't retire.
Yeah.
You know? And most people, I ask you, how do you start your stories? I ask you, how do you know that the story ended?
How do I finish a story? She says that her grandfather would give her the first books that she read of mine. And unfortunately, the grandfather passed away. Your grandfather must have been important in your life.
Oh, yeah.
I have this yearning for grandfathers and grandmothers. My grandfather was really important in my life, although he was very stern, you know, very austere. And I have a grandfather here who plays the game, the Ripper game, with my sleuth, who is this young girl who is 17. And to me, the best part of the book, well, it's the dog. Always dogs are the best. And then the relationship between the grandfather and the granddaughter, which is also present in Maya's notebook, my previous book. And now, how do I know when the book ends? I just give up. I give up because you can always add something. You can always change something. You can correct forever. So there's a point when I say, okay, enough is enough, that's done. It could be better, maybe a better ending. And I wish I had happy endings all the time. But you know, in life, there is no happy ending. It's just one day at a time. Things just happen. So I don't have really happy endings. They are always mixed, which drives my mother crazy. Yes?
I have a question. I've been yearning to ask you a question, but every time I get ready to ask, everyone's asking a similar question.
Sorry.
First of all, I got to applaud you and commend you for taking the time to talk about your history and your books more as a woman. I'm an author myself. I've written 2 books, and I've been through a bad tragedy. I lost my daughter to senseless act of teen violence. And I didn't even know who you were until a few Latina women from the Providence community told me, Rebecca, you know, we want you to go see this fantastic Latina writer. So here I am today, and I want to say I'm honored to be here.
Thank you.
Everyone else to hear you speak about your books. I want to ask you, how did you feel when you were writing the book about your daughter?
How did I feel? First of all, I'm so sorry what happened to your daughter. I think that, I don't know, one carries forever the sadness, forever. It's under the skin.
It takes a lot of guts to come out and be brave and still will to write a book about your own child. What made you first start and do it?
Well, Paula, my daughter, had a genetic condition that should not be fatal, called porphyria. And she knew she had it. She took very good care of herself. She was living in Spain, newly married with her husband. And she had a porphyria attack. She went to the hospital. There was neglect in the hospital. She fell in a coma. They didn't monitor the coma, and she ended up with severe brain damage. And I somehow brought her back to the United States in a coma. Can you imagine, in a commercial flight? That could be done before. It would be impossible after 9/11. And we took care of her at home until she died. She died on December 6, 1992. And as I said before, I start my books on January 8th. So the next year on January 8th, my mother said, on January 7th, my mother, who came, of course, said, what are you going to write? I was completely devastated and confused. I was just immersed in pain. I couldn't see anything else. And my mother said, if you don't write, you're going to die. And so I went to my casita on January 8th. And I just cried all day, and I don't remember writing a word, but I went every single day and spent hours until slowly this catharsis began. My mother gave me back 180 letters that I had written to her that year. And reading the letters in chronological order, I saw what my mother had been saying all the time, that Paula's only way out was death. And otherwise she would have been forever in a coma, in a bed. And I think that writing the book allowed me to organize that year in my head and name things. That's the beauty of language, the beauty of literature, that by choosing the word, you define reality. I have had to start from scratch in my life many times. And every time I have the fantasy that I will recreate myself in a new version, which never happens because I'm always in my skin. But I have had to tell my story many times. And when I tell my story, I change it. I use adjectives. I give it a color, a tone. And that can define if your life is tragic, if you're a victim, or if your life is wonderful and your life is a legend. And I tried to paint my life in Technicolor, in a big screen. I wanted to be legendary. And the same with that book. By just naming what had happened, I could contain it. And I could say, Paula died. And that had limits. On the other side, my grandchildren were being born. And I had not even seen that because I was totally immersed in the pain. And by setting limits to that pain, I was able to continue with my life. So that book really saved me. And 20 years later, I get messages, I would say every day, without exaggerating, from different places in the world. Someone who is either having a loss and they remember the book, or they are reading it for the first time, or another person who is having a loss needs to read the book. So I get messages all the time, so I feel that my daughter is there somewhere in the world touching people's hearts. Everybody has losses. But I tell you, after all these years, it's even hard for me to talk about it. The pain is always there.
It is, yes. Well, thank you very much for sharing.
You're welcome.
We have time for
2 more questions. Arriba? Okay.
Besides expressing art as a passion, non-passion,
I don't understand a word. Are you talking in Albanian? Project your voice like an actor.
you said before that in order to express art, it should be coming out of your heart instead of being a way of living. Besides that, would you have any advice from yourself for young generations to spark their interest into magic realism and all these genres, more into the actual literature itself? It'd be nice.
Yeah, and I can't give advice because the creative process is very personal. Each person expresses it differently, or is motivated differently, or has a different process. I know, for example, my husband, he can write on a little piece of paper 11 minutes in a bus. I can't do that. But I would say that writing is like sports. You train. In order to play the game, you train every single day. Nobody sees the training or the effort or the sweat. My son does the Ironman. He's all the time training. I think he's crazy. But in order to do the Ironman, he needs to do the training every day. It's the same with writing. In order to have one page that you can publish or that you can show to somebody, you have to write 1,000 drafts. So there's work involved, passion involved. You mentioned magic realism, and I want just to touch upon that. because I have been labeled as a magic realist writer because I'm Latin American. Yeah. In this book, Ripper, there's an astrologer, and there are psychics, and there are healers, and all kinds of New Age stuff, including psychics who can connect people with their dead pets. I know people like that, but all this happens in California. So it's not called magic realism. It's called magic realism when it happens in Chile. So that makes me a little mad, you know, that we are the magic realists. But the truth is that what is magic realism? It's accepting that we don't have all the answers, that the world is a very mysterious place, that everything is possible, that sometimes we are motivated just by emotions, by fear. We live, for example, right now in the United States in a state of paranoia. I took the train from New York to Boston. We had to wait like half an hour for the train. Big screens announcing all the stuff that can happen to you. The bombs that someone can leave in a backpack. The guy with a gun. What do you do if a gunman walks into the station? If you see something suspicious, where will you call? And then, as if that was not enough, there was a picture of San Francisco's earthquake. And then it said, the people didn't know the day before that the earthquake was coming. Be prepared. What? This is how we live. So, and all that is just emotion, stuff going on. That is magic realism to me, because it has no base on reality. It's completely magical. And that's the way the government controls us. So, I don't know, this magic realism thing. One more question. Okay, make it good. Who has a good question? Okay, you.
Many people have mentioned how your books, they've been given your books and your books have touched their lives. And I was wondering if there were authors that you read that really have influenced you as a person, and if you had specific experiences as a reader connecting to the things that you've read.
If I have books that have influenced me as a reader, I have been a reader, an avid reader, since I was very young, because I lived in Chile at a time when there was no TV, and we never went to the movies. I was the only girl in the house. I had brothers. And so I didn't have anybody to play with. I read. And there was no censorship for books in my house, and no books specially for kids. You could read whatever was available and you were interested in. When I was influenced, of course, by all the books I read as a child. I started reading Russian novelists when I was around 10 or 11, and that was an influence. Then science fiction, and that also was important. When I was 12 or 13 years old, I was living in Lebanon with my stepfather, who was a diplomat. My family was there. At the time in Lebanon, girls didn't go out. School and home, that was it. I didn't have any social life of any kind. To give you an idea, I heard about Elvis Presley when he was already fat. I had never heard of rock and roll or anything. No, it's true. And so I read, of course. My stepfather had 4 hidden volumes in his closet. He had an armoire, locked. And I knew that there he kept whiskey, cigarettes, chocolates, and 4 books. And Playboy, the Playboy magazine also. I wasn't interested in the Playboy magazine, but I wanted to know what those 4 books were all about. So I found a way of opening the armoire, and thank God he was a diplomat, so he had to go out almost every night to some kind of cocktail party or dinner or whatever. And I would sneak with a flashlight into the armoire and read the books. These 4 beautiful volumes were 1001 Nights, the Arabian Nights. And they were hidden there because they were supposed to be very erotic. everything was metaphorical. Things had metaphorical names, and I didn't know the basics. So I didn't understand a word of what was going on. But I was reading, I was hiding with a flashlight inside an armoire in Lebanon, while in the mosque they were calling for prayer. And can you imagine the atmosphere of all this? Plus, it was forbidden. So I was looking for the dirty parts as much as I could understand, and I couldn't mark the books because my stepfather would have known. So I would just skip pages, and the stories in my mind were getting mixed together, and I didn't know what I was reading, but it was fascinating. And what was fascinating was it described food, texture, smells, sounds. It was a world of the senses. And I think that is what I try to portray in my books. I want to call the reader into a universe in which the reader feels all of that. The abundance of life. The abundance of life that I feel in my life all the time is what I want to find in the books I read and in the books I write. Thank you very, very much.